Hello, my name is Matt Stohrer and I repair saxophones for a living. Today, I would like to show you something rather rare and interesting. This is a regular run-of-the-mill, although still very cool, Conn E-flat alto saxophone. This is a 1932. You have the neck and the mouthpiece. This is called a 6M transitional. This is a 1928 Conn F Mezzo-soprano saxophone. Key of E-flat, key of F. This is one whole step higher. These saxophones were only made for a little while, and they are exceedingly rare because they were introduced in the spring of 1928. And they were supposed to capitalize upon the saxophone craze of the 20s, the kind of the height of the jazz age. So they introduced a whole new model in a new key, the mezzo-soprano in the key of F. And they were not successful for a number of reasons. There was no music written for them. The saxophone craze was kind of tapering down, and the Great Depression had hit. So the customers for this horn were restricted to saxophone crazed people who also had money to burn in the Great Depression, which are obviously not a whole lot of people. So Conn made a bunch of these. This is serial number 213,000. Most of them you'll see are going to be between 213,000 and 216,000. They made a bunch of these, but most of them were unsold, and they actually were used as practice instruments for the Conn repair school. So they would literally just get wrapped around the corner of a table, and then someone would be told to fix them. They'd get fixed, and then they'd do it again. So most of them led very tough lives. This one is a remarkable survivor. It's in almost mint condition. I just finished an overhaul, and it's a fantastic player. And I'll show you a little bit more of that saxophone after I show you the differences here. Okay, so you've got a F mezzo-soprano neck and an E-flat alto neck. You can see no microtuner, quite a bit smaller. There was also a mouthpiece specifically for the F saxophones. Conn made two F saxophones. One is this guy here, the F mezzo-soprano. The other is the Conno sax, which is a straight saxophone with a range from low A to high G. And you see those very rarely, although if you look on the internet you can find an awful lot of photos. So unfortunately, someone cut the last little bit of this mouthpiece off. I don't know why. It still plays because they didn't cut the business end, but this is not fully original, although this is a Conn F saxophone mouthpiece. And you can see the difference in size with an E-flat most easily when you look at the window and the table. So the length of this mouthpiece and the internal volume is specifically matched up for the F saxophones. A lot of times you'll see people playing alto mouthpieces on these F saxophones because these are so hard to find, the F mouthpieces, but it's just not the same. The intonation isn't right, the sound isn't right, it just doesn't really do the instrument justice. So if you want to really play an F mezzo-soprano and have it sound like it's supposed to, you need to have an original mouthpiece. Although I believe there may be some reproductions getting made soon. So let me get this alto out of the way. You can also just see the difference in size and length, the different bell sizes. Everything is different. The F saxophone is completely engineered from the ground up to be an F saxophone. It wasn't just cut down. You can't do that. You have to change the relationships between all the tone holes, all the keys. The bore is different. And this is a fully realized saxophone. So let me get this out of the way. So this is like I said, a fully realized saxophone, which means that Conn lost an awful lot of money on this instrument, although they did apply some of what they learned here to some of their later saxophones. This is one of the first instruments you'll see where they move the bell keys to the left side. They also have much more updated and modern feeling palm keys. They still have the New Wonder Series 2 pinky table that the rest of the saxophones in this range had. They still have the old style octave mechanism. And they still have pretty much the exact same stack mechanism. but you do have left-hand bell keys and a much nicer feeling palm key set. Now, as far as these instruments, you can expect to pay anywhere between, I would say, $4,000 if you get lucky and it needs an overhaul, up to $7,000 to $8,000 if you find a really nice example that's already been overhauled. And this is probably about as nice as you'll see. Most of them are going to be in silver plate. There's a few that are in lacquer, and even fewer, very few, that are in gold plate, although that was an option. This particular one would have cost $135 new in 1928, and the gold-plated version would have cost about $75 more, I think. As far as considerations when you're working on this instrument, the key heights are going to feel a little bit low because it's so close to feeling like an alto that you tend to kind of think of it and feel like it's an alto, especially while you're playing, which is another whole thing, which I'll get to later. But the key heights do need to be a little bit lower. It needs to be just kind of set up just a little smaller than an alto. I used flat metal resonators on this, which I think came out really well. And it does play really well in tune when you've got the original mouthpiece. It has the straight style pivot screws rather than the tapered like you find on the 6Ms. It does have the set screws on the side, like Conn's like you're used to, so make sure you've got all your set screws and make sure you've got all your pivot screws. You can buy reproduction pivot screws if you need them. You've got your whole upper stack on one long rod, although the size of the instrument being what it is, there's a little bit less inertia in the instrument to bend it around, and the hinge tube, the rod is larger relative to the keys than on an alto, so it seems a little bit more durable. Same thing on the back end. You've got a long hinge tube here for your lower stack and another long hinge tube for your B and B flat. This piece here, being unprotected on the back, could be bent, and getting that long hinge tube straight when you've got bends in these long, or the hinge rod, getting that straight and then getting the hinge tubes themselves, which is the keys, straight after they've been bent can be a little bit of a pain. Obviously I didn't have to work through that on this one, it just came in really, really nice shape. As far as the mechanics of the instrument, it's really not that different than any other Conn. Like I said, the main thing you have to remember when you're setting it up is it's not an alto. It's not a soprano either. It's a whole step higher than an alto, and you have to really pay attention and listen and set it up to be its own horn. It's not an alto, it's not a soprano. And that's something that actually really comes to a head when you're playing it, because if you've played much saxophone, you probably hear the notes in your head as you're playing them. And let's see if I can get it to focus on this engraving here. There, isn't that pretty? You probably hear the notes you play in your head as you're playing them, and you do a lot of voicing in your throat. And some of that may be conscious, some of it may be unconscious. And when you play an F saxophone, you are going to find that the voicings you do, for me, I was voicing in the key of E flat. And I was pulling things way out of tune when I first started playing it. And on particularly finicky notes, like say A with the octave key, D with the octave key, my voicing was off enough that it was making the note sound considerably different than the notes around it. I had a really airy A that kind of cracked, and my D was really, really stuffy. Oh, and also notice this bis key, which is really cool. It's really easy to roll. It feels really good under the fingers. Wish that they'd kind of done this more on other instruments, but it doesn't work so much better that it ever really caught on. So like I was saying, so I was voicing for an alto, and what I had to do to make things better was to just play scales and arpeggios for a while and just listen to the instrument and voice the next note up in my head. And once I got used to playing a saxophone in the key of F, then it started to sound a lot better. And it started to play much more in tune and much more clear, which, by the way, there are a few recordings of this instrument being played on YouTube. Although for my taste, they sound mostly like an alto in those recordings. And I think the instrument sounds significantly different. I would compare it to the low register, like the right hand, like F, E, D, C, and the low register of a soprano. The tone is very much like that, but it also has a fullness to it that I would say is more like a tenor, actually. Or perhaps like Cannonball playing alto, but he always played alto, and it sounds a lot like he's playing a tenor, just because it's so full. So there you have it. As far as working on the instrument, the main consideration is, remember, it's in F, it's not an alto. Although the mechanics are very, very similar, there's not too much trouble there, especially if it's in really, really good shape like this. Key heights are going to be a little lower than an alto. You can sort of see here the heights I've got, and those ended up working pretty well for this instrument. And there's no bumpers on your B and B flat. It actually all comes down to this key here, which you can see has a very large cork on it. If you want that not to bounce, you have to be very careful with the materials you use between the B and the B flat and right here, and how you shape them. You don't want to have any sort of bounce in those keys. You want them to feel very positive, even though they don't have felts here. Although if you wanted to, you could probably put felts on, although it just wouldn't look quite as nice. Also has the split E flat, which I left engaged on this instrument. A lot of times I'll make this work as it's supposed to, and then just spring it opposite, just because it tends to kind of go out of adjustment after a while. But this instrument really seemed to like the extra venting provided, so I left that fully engaged. Feels very good under the fingers. The keywork is really well made. I think this is probably would represent Conn's kind of first step between this and the Conosax, first step towards more modern feeling keywork. This feels a lot more like a 6M under the fingers than it does a New Wonder Series 2, aka Chewberry, which would have been the instrument that Conn was making at the time for alto. Could be just because it's smaller, or it could be because they were actually kind of making some refinements as far as the way the keys looked and felt. I tend to think it's a bit of both. Definitely when compared to a New Wonder Series 2 alto, this does seem to be a bit better built, a bit more refined, a bit more thought put into it. And like I said, it's a very, very nice playing instrument. Now I am going to try to make a recording of this separately and see if I can get that uploaded so you can hear what it sounds like. No guarantees because my microphone really sucks. Been working on getting something better, just have not got it in time for this instrument. Oh, another thing to look out for, this is the same on Conn's, is on most Conns. The inside of the neck tenon is conical, so if it doesn't fit, you have to be very careful about expanding this that you don't disturb that taper. And that's about it. This is the Conn F Mezzo-soprano saxophone, made for just a little while, and not many of them survive. This is a beautiful instrument that really sounds wonderful. Not a whole lot written for it, but it really is a very unique and interesting saxophone. And really it's an orphan of the jazz age. It was made, designed, thought about, and really done very well, implemented very well by Conn, but introduced at a time when the world no longer wanted or needed it. So you don't see too many of them. Well, hope you found it helpful, interesting, useful to see this. My name is Matt Stohrer. I repair saxophones for a living. If you have any questions, please feel free to get in touch. You can leave a comment here, you can send me an email, or you can check out my website at stohrermusic.com. Thanks for watching.